Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, Ingenious Thinkers, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of ingenuity. With me today is Yannick Benjamin, a celebrated New York City-based sommelier. He is a co-founder of Contento Restaurant in East Harlem and Beaupierre Wines and Spirits in Hell's Kitchen. Yannick is also a co-founder of Wine on Wheels, an organization of wine lovers and sommeliers who have come together to harness their love of great wines to benefit charity. Yannick, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, you obviously have an unbelievable passion for wine and hospitality. I look at it, you've been named as one of Wine Enthusiast's top 40 under 40. You have worked at some of the truly great restaurants, Le Cercle, Jean-Georges, Fileria, Atelier, at the Ritz-Carlton. This is not a normal rise. So tell me, what drove you? Where did that passion come from? What drove you to get to where you are today?
Well, I owe everything to my family, in particular my mother and my father, who are both French immigrants. My father coming to New York City in 1963, right after the French-Algerian War, and he followed his two older brothers. And there was this tremendous community of French immigrants, but they all came from this small little village out in Brittany called Bretagne in French. And they all
Hmm.
worked in all the best French restaurants. So it became like a big running joke that all the great French restaurants had the Breton mafia kind of working there. So I really, obviously very much looked up to my father. I looked up to my uncles, and I was always intrigued and excited by hearing their stories of working in restaurants. I was always fascinated by it. And so eventually I followed that same path. Of course, you know, um, most immigrants would like their children to be working in an office with air conditioning, possibly going into the route of like being a doctor or an investment banker or politician or a lawyer. And so, of course, my father, my mom were slightly a little disappointed that I would be doing what they were doing because they always only want the best for you and they want you to do better than them. But they saw that I had a real passion for this particular subject and this particular industry.
Oh, it's wonderful. I mean, I'm guessing they've come to appreciate your passion and what you've done.
Oh, most certainly, they've been incredibly supportive. I'm very grateful.
So, can you tell us in your words what a sommelier does, what it is?
Yes. So very simply, a sommelier is someone that works in a restaurant where they're serving wine, they're recommending wine, they're maintaining the actual beverage program. But a sommelier is much more than that. It's not someone who just oversees wine, but you're overseeing the beer, the cocktail program, all the spirits, sake, and then of course now a very important category is the non-alcoholic beverages. So you're also overseeing that. So
Mm.
you're really someone who has an immense knowledge of liquid geography, but most importantly, you're going to create a unique experience for that guest that comes to your establishment. And by the way, sommelier, traditionally is someone that works in a restaurant, but could be someone that works in a retail store as well. It's someone that's really pursuing their craft, their passion of beverages, and really creating a unique experience for that guest.
Well, I love that liquid geography. That's wonderful. That's a wonderful way to think about it. Now, so as we started, you've worked at some of the finest restaurants, but this has led you to open some of your own restaurants and organizations. Contento. I went on to the Michelin guidebook and it said you've ushered in Caribbean vibes.
Right. So, Contento Restaurant, we opened this originally with the intention of opening in the spring of 2020. So we had all the construction, we had all the furniture inside the restaurant, and we were ready to rock and roll. Unfortunately, COVID happened, so we were shut down. And so we had this fully furnished restaurant open for well over a year and a half. So you can only imagine what a way to start a small little restaurant up in East Harlem. And so finally, we decided to open up the doors on June 10th, 2021. And originally, the cuisine at Contento was supposed to be just kind of more neighborhood. And our chef at the time was from Peru, from Lima, and so he
Hmm.
was using a lot of the flavors and the inspiration of his home country, which was Peru. And so slowly but surely, we became known as this Peruvian restaurant, and it really kind of happened organically. And then a few years later, um, he moved on to do some consulting, and he was traveling a lot. So he brought in a young girl, Asia Shabazz, who's currently the chef at Contento, who grew up a couple of blocks away. And instead of Peruvian, she brought in her passion of West Caribbean, West African cuisine, also this kind of soul food. And she's of African American descent, and she grew up in East Harlem, so she's inspired by those flavors. So it's been very interesting, that whole transition.
No, that's wonderful. So I mean, Contento's grown into, what I read to be, a wonderful neighborhood
Yeah.
restaurant. I know the area. My son, young
Ah,
architect, and he spent about 8 months in New York in his first piece of work, and it was just as they were shutting down for COVID.
yes.
And he was up in Harlem as well, around 1/8, 114, 116. So
Oh,
not too
wow.
far
Okay.
away from you. Yeah, and he spent those 8 months inside. So I can really, I feel the pain you had, but obviously it's come to market. It's doing wonderfully. There's got to be some kind of, fear or even, a little bit terrifying in the New York scene to launch your first restaurant. What is that like?
Oh, it's definitely terrifying. I think, there's constant anxiety. Being a small business owner, and but let alone being a first time, restaurant owner, in a city like New York, is very challenging, and it's a very competitive place. There's over 26,000 restaurants here in New York City alone.
Mhm.
The survival rate of a restaurant is tiny, and it's not just New York. It's global, right? If you make it past your first year, that's considered a success. Your second, your third, but really, the chances of survival are very, very minuscule. So it is an incredibly big gamble. What I will say to you is that the location that we happen to step upon, where Contento's at, on 88 East 2011th Street between Park and Madison, we got a tremendous deal from the landlord.
Mhm.
And we thought that, well, hey, that makes sense because the overhead of a restaurant is so high and the net profit is so incredibly low. And to be quite honest with you, I knew that going into this, I would not see a penny probably for a very, very long time. And I really still have not. And that I knew that I had to go into this with, a very open mind, knowing that this was a passion project. And hopefully that if this worked out, that this would open the doors to other opportunities as well. But certainly to answer your question, of course, it's a very stressful situation. Like I said, you have to answer a Department of Buildings, you have Department of Health, broken machines, ice machines that breaks down. You have people who call out sick at the very last minute. It just never stops. It's a very tough business to say the least, Ken.
It sounds wonderful. I've
Yeah,
been an
exactly.
entrepreneur a long time. That
It,
just
it,
sounds,
exactly.
I think I'll stick to eating and find
Yes,
restaurants.
I think that's a smart idea.
So, tell us about your support though for like New York agriculture and New York wines, because it seems like your neighborhood, your community, and you've really embraced
Hmm.
local as part
Yeah.
of your passion.
Well, that's a really great question. I think that in particularly in the pandemic, I had this moment of enlightenment where I was saying to myself, well, I can name you every single region in France and in Italy and Spain and parts of Germany and really describe it to a T. But yet here I am, born and raised New Yorker, and
Hmm.
I can't do it as well. And that just seems so ridiculous. And then I'm trying to plan to build this restaurant that has this ethos of sustainability and being barrier free. And how can we not represent these farmers these individuals who are just absolutely tremendous, and they're just a couple of miles away from us, right? But yet we have so many producers that we're representing that are thousands of miles away from us. And
Hmm.
so, really, during the pandemic, I went into a moment of introspection and just went into a deep dive and started traveling, particularly in the Northeast area, vineyards in Virginia, Hudson Valley in New York, the Finger Lakes in New York, the North Fork in New York, Vermont, where they're making some really cool stuff as well. So doing all these kind of like getaways or traveling to these places and really understanding who the people were behind the label was so incredibly beneficial and helpful.
So how does that work then? Because we have a wonderful restaurant near us. I live just outside of Toronto,
Yep.
and it's farm to table. You don't know what the menu is going to be. There's going to be four or five options, and it's completely driven by what the chef has found
Oh,
that day. Is that the type of thing you incorporate, or how do you? What drives what?
well, for sure. I mean, that would be a dream if I could do something like that. That's a really cool concept, but I'm sure it's a heck of a lot of work, and you've got
Hmm.
to be on top of your game. We do change our menus seasonally, without a doubt. But it's a menu that goes by, fall, winter, spring, and summer. And we certainly try to our best to, even with the food, to work with ingredients that are certainly local and that are representative of the terroir of what we represent, because all the partners actually that are involved with Contento are actually born and raised New Yorkers, which is kind of in itself a rarity. So we are very proud of who we are. We're very proud of where we're from. And we want to showcase and let people know that there's this incredible agricultural side to New York, to the East Coast, to the Northeast.
What are some of the the local celebrated fruits or foods that are
Well,
grown?
yeah, I would definitely say the apple is like a big one, right? Without a doubt. When you go out into Long Island right now, especially the North Fork, my God, the vegetables, I mean, some great potatoes as well that are just being grown out there. Unbelievable. You have some pretty good corn without a doubt as well. Parts of the Hudson Valley too. I mean, some tremendous tomatoes. Um, Amazing artisanal cheeses that are being made right now. Small craft beer, it's unreal.
Beautiful.
We have a sake brewery that's doing a tremendous job out in Brooklyn. So this diversity, because we're such a melting pot at the same time of people from different countries, different regions that are coming here, and you've got this, motley crew of different ideas all coming together. It's really a mosaic. And so you see all these unique different vegetables and fruits and agricultural techniques that are being used to really, come to us at the farmers market. And it's such a blessing. I mean, if you come to the Union Square Farmers Market at any time of the week, I mean, it's an embarrassment of riches. It really is, in the best possible way.
Beautiful. I mean, and it sounds like you've done your best to, or you're doing your best to bring that to market, which is great. I mean, growing up, well, I didn't grow up in Ontario, but being in Ontario, Toronto, we have that same sort of
Sure.
mentality. So I think that's wonderful, especially in New York,
Yeah.
where people just think about the hundreds of towers and not what's behind them.
Hey, that's
Uh,
true. Exactly. Well said.
um, Wine on Wheels and the Solera project. Tell us about that. That's another passion project.
Yeah, so I think to understand why no whales, I have to give you a little background on who I am. In 2003, at the age of 25 years old, unfortunately, I was in a car accident that left me paralyzed from the waist down. And prior to that, I had only worked in restaurants. It was the only thing that I knew. I mean, that was,
Hmm.
at 25, I already had this whole plan ahead of me, um, to have this whole career in hospitality and eventually own my restaurant or restaurants. And I mean, I already had a design of how I wanted my restaurant to look like, the name of it, everything. And as you can imagine, just like a college athlete or a young kid who's playing sports and is doing quite well for themselves, you find yourself in a situation where your body is no longer responding the way you want it to respond, or it's not cooperating.
Hmm.
And certainly that happened to me when I became paralyzed from the waist down. And so trying to get back into restaurants was really challenging, only for the fact that people were not familiar, or people need to see something before they can actually believe in it. And it's not because people are ignorant, but I understand it in many ways, right? And so the concept of someone, trying to envision someone on a wheelchair working in a very busy restaurant where there's tight corners, probably steps, where there's fire, hot oil, sharp objects, you name it, is almost a foreign concept, and it's still very much a foreign concept. So in the meantime, I thought, well, we have to create an organization where we can advocate for ourselves and we can educate people. Let's not be angry at people for not knowing, but
Hmm.
instead let's educate. Let's build that bridge. So we created this organization called Wine on Wheels to, one, support people with disabilities from lower income backgrounds, to have the wine industry support us, create these tastings, have restaurants support us, but at the same time, show these wineries, show these restaurants that people with disabilities could work in these establishments as long as we have an open mind and we think from more of an abstract point of view. Because instead of looking at what they can't do, let's see what they can do, and let's see what they can bring to the table. Because if they that one thing that they can bring to the table can be so much more valuable than everything else. And so that's how we have to start thinking, but that's how we in the community have to start showing that and proving that to people.
One, I love the fact that it's not being angry, that it's educating.
Yeah.
And I've, not in this area, but I've said that to so many people who will, not on this show, but in some of the work that I do, just they come in with that anger of you don't understand, you should understand, you're ignorant or you're whatever. And I'm like, hey, I'm at step one. It's not, maybe it's ignorant. Whatever, it's step one. Work me through it.
Right.
So I think that that approach it's wonderful. So thank you for pioneering it or taking it within the hospitality. The other thing you talk about open-mindedness, you worked again at some of the finest restaurants.
Mm.
Um, Somebody must have been very open-minded. Somebody must have, somebody took a leap.
Indeed, and that's a great question. I was very lucky prior to my car accident that I had this tremendous resume already, that I
Hmm.
already built that. And then finally, when the time came after trial and error, because to be quite honest with you, I was a big athlete. I had always taken very good care of myself. Working out, even up to today, is very much a big part of my life. And without it, I just kind of fall apart if I don't work out. So it's really, really important. And so fortunately, I had all those components. And it was almost as if like I was training myself. I was practicing premeditation of adversity, knowing that someday, somehow, I was going to have to deal with something. It was very strange. And so when this moment came, I was certainly prepared. Sure, there were definitely moments where mentally it was exhausting, where I had my moments of wanting to give up, but somehow I found that
Hmm.
I found that spirit to keep going. But to be quite honest with you, I also had such a tremendous network of friends and family that were pushing me, because you really need that during those times of trial, right? And so, of course, I would go out, I would email my resume. At that time, I would fax my resume too. And it was rejection after rejection. I mean, I remember even going to an interview. I guess they called me up. And when I rolled in there on my wheelchair to the interview, the gentleman had a very awkward, he was very awkward. He was laughing. He didn't know how to deal with me, and he
Yeah.
wasn't laughing at me, making fun of me. He's just like, oh, what's gonna, and I remember leaving that interview feeling very defeated. But eventually, through all those rejections, through all those misunderstandings, I was learning about myself. And that's when I had that realization that I shouldn't expect everyone to know my situation, that it's really my job to kind of figure out the dialogue to explain to them. And certainly when I met this gentleman, Jean-Luc Ledoux, who was who was part of the same part of Brittany, the same village as my father, who gave me that first shot to come and work, to come back to the industry and work. And he kind of gave me the green light to do whatever I wanted. And I knew that that was a moment for me, a very small opportunity that I was going to take advantage of and really roll with it.
So how do you leverage that now? I mean, how do you, what you've been through, what you've learned about accessibility and opportunities within your industry, how do you take everything you've learned now and pass that on or spread it to other parts of the industry, if you will?
I think that with the conversation with accessibility, it's a conversation that should never end. Yeah. And so, and we as human beings, we sometimes get very excited about something, and we get very how can we say we get very rah about it, but then then we kind of forget, right? And we see this
Mhm.
constantly. We see people who are advocating, they're out in protest for weeks on end, and then it just kind of, you don't hear about it anymore, right? And so advocacy is not something that you just do for a couple of weeks or for a couple of months and then there's a high point. No, you got to keep going. You got to keep going. And it's because the conversation should never really end. And so my job, what I feel is my job, is to continuously, like, just like working out. You don't work out that muscle, it gets a little flabby, right? And so I feel like I'm the workout machine. I'm the treadmill, and my job is to make sure I get people on the treadmill so they don't forget about this conversation, that they don't forget that people with disabilities want to get hired, that people with disabilities want to work, that people with disabilities actually do have spending money and they want to go out to eat at restaurants. And if they don't go out to eat at restaurants, it's because they've identified something that makes them feel uncomfortable about going to your restaurant. And I tell people that, it's not just about creating wider doors or putting grab bars and making sure your bathroom is accessible and making sure that the bar is at the right height. But the most important thing that we can all practice is social accessibility, meaning that understanding the actual client, being respectful, but also understanding who you're working with. Because just because somebody's is jumping up and down, is fast, they may have a disability themselves, right? So being
Mhm.
sensitive about language and being aware of our surroundings. So there's so many components of this, right? That this conversation's so big, and in many ways it's so nuanced. It's why it needs to continue on, and it should continue on for as long as it can.
Is there a way, I mean, through Wine on Wheels, because I know you're supporting individuals in this, is this your way to sort of bottle and give it back, if you will, or give back?
What Well, listen, so much in many ways has been given to me, and I'm so grateful, and I'm so obviously from my family to my friends, but to people in the industry who've really paved the way for me in so many ways. Of course, they open up the door, but then it's up to me to really make things happen. There's only so much so many people can do for me. And so you have to persist, and you have to persist through these really difficult and challenging times, because they will happen no matter what. And then you have to resist the temptation of wanting to give up or choosing the easy way out. And I think that's all of us, as human beings. And so every day there are going to be challenges. There are going to be obstacles as such as death, right? You're going to hear bad news that you're not going to want to hear. Um, if you have a business, things are going to go wrong. And sometimes you just have to remind yourself and go, like, when you wake up in the morning, and just say, and almost practice the art of premeditation of adversity, and say to yourself, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to meet really bad people. I'm going to meet rude people. I'm going to, my train is going to be delayed. Elevators are going to break down. And it's not a way of being negative, but it's a way of just saying to yourself, of preparing for these certain situations. And if you think about it, when that moment happens, you're able to kind of, you know, work around it. It's important that we all build our own little personal citadel, right? To protect ourselves from these situations, because these situations for sure will happen. because the forces of nature, the cosmic forces, when they're coming for you, there's no stopping them. And so I think mentally preparing this is really key. But I like I said, my background, I grew up and I was very much influenced by the Christian brothers, who I just thought I really was in deep admiration of this servitude, that they would give up this life of family, to serve the greater good. And I was particularly touched by one gentleman named Brother Tony Reynolds, who I still keep in touch with, who was my art teacher for over 8 years in grammar school. And I learned more about life than about art, to be quite honest with you about that. And so this concept of servitude and helping the community was always within me. And then when the accident came, it was just, okay, I need to do something, because during those moments, during those really difficult moments, so many people had my back.
Yannick Benjamin, it's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, our time has just flown by, and you've said a lot of sage advice type of things, but I think, practicing adversity, that's incredible. I've never really thought about it that way, and I love the way that you use it in a positive. It's like you use it in the way that you want to build resilience, and you've chosen one of the toughest roles in one of the most difficult industries in New York City.
Yeah.
And as everyone says, or everywhere you read, you have really risen to the top. So thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure talking to you. A lot of fun.